Today on Sugar Spun Run, I'll be showing you how to make a caramel cake. Hey Sugar Spun bakers, so today I have a pretty simple cake recipe for you. A caramel cake is made with a pretty basic soft vanilla cake layer, and it's topped off with a decadent caramel frosting. The caramel frosting is what really makes this a caramel cake. Now to get started, the first thing you're going to want to do is preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Today we are going to be using a method of making our cake batter called reverse creaming. It's going to be a little bit different than the other cake recipes on my site. We are going to start by combining all of our dry ingredients and our sugar in the bowl of a stand mixer. We are going to start with 3 cups of all-purpose flour, and we'll add this to our bowl. We're going to add our sugars. You'll need 1.5 cups of granulated sugar. We're also going to be using a 1/2 cup of firmly packed light brown sugar. I like to use a light brown sugar because it just gives the cake a richer flavor than we would have if we were just using granulated. We'll also add 1 tablespoon of baking powder and 3/4 teaspoon of salt. Now we'll just use our mixer to stir until these ingredients are well combined. Now this recipe could be made using an electric hand mixer if you prefer. You just want to make sure you use a really large bowl. I'll show you why when we get to adding the butter. So I mentioned we're going to be reverse creaming our cake batter. Now with most of my cake recipes, you cream together your butter and your sugar. With this method, what we're going to be doing is we'll be adding the butter 1 tablespoon at a time to our flour mixture. We'll be using a total of 3/4 cup of unsalted butter, and you want this to be softened to room temperature. Just keep your mixer on low speed while you're doing this, and don't add the next tablespoon until the first one is well incorporated. As I mentioned, if you're using a hand mixer, you'll want to use a large bowl, that way the flour doesn't go flying everywhere. So by reverse creaming or adding the butter in this way, what we're doing is we are coating all of the gluten, all of the flour molecules with this butter fat. This helps to produce a very velvety, nice, plush cake. So once all of your butter is incorporated, you should have a coarse, sandy looking mixture. There shouldn't be any big discernible pieces of butter. Let me show you. So it's nice and crumbly looking. This is exactly how your cake batter should look at this point. Not very much like a batter. Now, the next thing we're going to be adding is some oil. I like to use canola oil, vegetable oil, or any other neutral oil will work just fine. This helps make the cake a little bit more moist than if we just were to use butter. I'm going to stir this in. And that was 1/4 cup of canola oil. Now the next thing you're going to need is some whole milk, some eggs, and some vanilla extract. You can either combine these in a separate bowl, or I have a pretty big measuring cup. I'm going to just try to combine everything in here and save a dish. Now the first thing you need is 1 1/4 cups of whole milk, and we are going to add 3 large eggs in with this. You should really always crack your eggs in a separate bowl. That way if you get any shells, it's easier to remove them. But again, I'm trying to save some dishes here today. Mostly that's for Zach because he does all of my dishes. And these are 3 large eggs, and ideally they should be at room temperature. Now we're also going to be adding 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract. And we'll just whisk these ingredients together until they're completely combined. Make sure you break up those yolks in there. Okay, now turn your mixer to low speed, and we are going to gradually add this milk and egg mixture to our other ingredients. So once everything is looking pretty well combined, you do want to stop. Use a spatula to scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl because it's really important that all of your ingredients are well combined. And sometimes little pockets of batter or flour will try to sit at the bottom of my mixer. Once you have everything combined, meaning all of the little pockets that might have been settled at the bottom of the mixing bowl, we're going to turn our speed up to medium-high and beat it for a couple seconds longer so we have a nice, smooth, velvety batter. See, you can't do this with my other cake recipes. You have to be very careful not to overmix. So that's one nice thing about reverse creaming. Now this batter is looking really nice and smooth. So now we'll prepare our baking pans. I'm going to be using 2 8-inch baking pans for this recipe. I do have notes in the printable recipe if you want to use 9-inch pans instead. You want to make sure they're pretty deep. I think these are about a little over 2 inches deep. Now I'm going to first prepare these pans by spraying the sides with baking spray. And this is a baking spray that has flour. You don't want to just use any cooking spray. And you want to make sure you get the sides really thoroughly, so I'm just going to use a paper towel Just make sure these are completely coated. And you don't have to worry too much about the bottoms because we are going to be using parchment paper on the bottoms. This is going to ensure that your cakes will not stick. Nothing worse than a cake that when you go to turn it out of its pan, it sticks. So just divide your cake batter evenly into your pans. I always just eyeball this, but I'm sure I'd have much more even layers if I actually weighed my cake pans while I was filling them. So these are looking good. They look pretty even. So we're going to transfer them to our 350-degree Fahrenheit preheated oven where they're going to need to bake for about 30 to 35 minutes. You do not want to overbake these cakes or they will be dry and crumbly and you don't want that. You'll know that your cakes are finished baking when they are a light golden brown around the edges and a toothpick inserted in the center comes out clean or with a few moist crumbs. Now, if the toothpick is clean, it definitely means your cakes are finished baking. I prefer there to be a few moist crumbs on the toothpick like this one has because that means that the cake is just barely finished baking. It's going to bake a little bit more as it cools, and when you stop baking the cake at this point, it allows it to finish baking without becoming dry and crumbly and overbaked. We'll let these cakes cool in their pans for about 15 minutes, and then we are going to run a knife around the edge of the cakes, and we'll invert these onto a cooling rack and let them cool completely. Looks like I could have done a slightly better job greasing the sides of the cake pan, but those parchment paper liners make sure the bottom is completely smooth and comes out without a problem every time. That's why we do it. We will let these cakes cool completely before we cover them with our frosting. Once they're cooled, we can head over to the stovetop where any good caramel starts, and we can start making our caramel. You are going to need a medium-sized saucepan to start. We're going to be adding 2 cups of firmly packed brown sugar. I like to use a blend half light brown, half dark brown, but you can use all light brown sugar, that would be completely fine. We'll also be adding 1 cup of unsalted butter, and I've cut this into tablespoon-sized pieces. It's just going to help everything melt a little bit faster. We will also be adding 1/3 cup each of whole milk and heavy cream, and just 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Set your stovetop heat to medium, and we are just going to stir these ingredients together. You'll want to stir pretty frequently until the butter is melted and the sugar is dissolved. Continue to stir frequently until the mixture comes to a boil. One thing to keep in mind is you do not want to crank up the heat to get this icing to boil faster. If you do that, the sugar is not going to dissolve properly. You're going to end up with a gritty caramel icing. You don't want that. So once this mixture starts to bubble and boil, we are going to start stirring it constantly, and we are going to do this for 5 minutes. Once 5 minutes has passed, we'll take this off of the heat, continue to stir it so none of the caramel burns. And then you'll want to pour this into a large heat-proof bowl, or preferably the bowl of a stand mixer. I am not using a stand mixer to make the icing, and if you're not either, you are going to need a handheld electric mixer. It's just going to make everything a lot faster than doing it by hand. Now, once you've poured your caramel into the heat-proof bowl, we're going to let it cool for just a couple minutes, so up to 5 minutes, and then we are going to add our powdered sugar. This is 2 cups of powdered sugar. We'll also add 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Now we're going to start by stirring on low speed until everything is combined. Now we will gradually increase the speed of our mixer to high, and we are going to stir this on high speed until the mixture is completely cooled and the desired consistency is reached. And I will show you exactly what that desired consistency looks like. The reason I really prefer a stand mixer for this is because it's a lot of mixing, so your arm's probably going to get pretty tired. The thing I love about this caramel cake is that the icing is the highlight and there is no decorating required. When we go to decorate this cake, we're just going to slap it on and call it a day. I am a terrible cake decorator, so this is perfect for me. My sister, well, one of my sisters, because I have 4, is getting married in November, and I am going to be planning her bridal shower. So I've been looking for a really good cake recipe that I don't have to decorate, that I can put on the dessert table, and this one is right now a top contender. So you don't want to beat this frosting until it is completely cooled, otherwise it's going to be too stiff to really spread nicely. So what you want to do is you'll fill the bowl, it should feel still slightly warm. You can probably tell just from looking at it, this frosting has thickened from when we originally started, and when I lift the mixer beaters out, the icing that drizzles back down, it holds its shape for a few seconds before it dissolves back into a puddle, right back into the frosting. So we're in a pretty good point, we're in pretty good shape right here. So let's go ahead and start icing our cake. Start by transferring one of your cake layers to your serving plate. This is actually my great, I think, grandmother's cake platter, and I love using it. I use it in a lot of my pictures over on my blog. So we've got our first cake layer down. We are going to spread a nice layer of caramel frosting over that. And you can see it's kind of dripping off the spatula because it's still pretty hot. Well, not hot, it's just a little bit warm. But as we spread it on the cake, it's holding its shape pretty well. It's not just oozing off the sides of the cake. If it were doing that, you would want to wait a little bit longer, mix it a little bit more before you try to ice your cake. It's okay if a little bit goes over the edge. You just don't want it to be pouring off and super liquidy. We'll catch that excess when we go do the sides. And I always forget that if you put a tiny bit of icing on the cake platter before you add your cake, it helps it stick so that it doesn't slide around like mine's doing right here while you're icing it. I will add our second cake layer. You can see these cakes bake up pretty flat, pretty level. If they're not, you can level them off with a sharp knife, with a serrated knife. But I find that most of my cakes bake up pretty level anyway, but especially when I'm reverse creaming. So because my edges are a little ragged looking and those crumbs are going to get all in the frosting, I'm going to do a very thin crumb coating around the outside of the cake. This is just a very thin layer of frosting that's going to catch all of your crumbs. Once you've done your crumb coating, let the cake sit for several minutes. That's actually probably not a bad idea with this cake anyway because the top layer is sliding a little bit, which is telling me my frosting's still a little bit warm. So I've done my crumb coating. You can either pop this in the fridge for 5 minutes, or since the caramel icing is going to harden on its own, let it sit untouched for 5 minutes, and then you can continue to ice the cake. And now all of those crumbs that were on the side, they're caught in that crumb coating. So your finished cake, the icing on the outside, is all going to be smooth or pretty and crumb-free. Okay, finally this looks pretty darn good and it smells amazing. Now, ideally you would wait a little bit before digging in. This caramel frosting could harden even more. It will solidify even more as it sits, but I haven't had lunch. I'm really hungry, and like I said, it smells amazing. So we're going to go ahead and dig in. I am so excited about this. This is your first time seeing the inside of the cake. As you can tell, hopefully, it's nice and plush. I can't help but touch it because it's so soft, and I'm the only one who's going to be eating it, so it's okay. This vanilla cake is the perfect complement to the rich caramel icing. You guys are going to love this, and so am I. I can't wait to dig in. All right, thank you so much for watching today's caramel cake recipe, and if you try this one out, I would love to hear what you think. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Oh, this is amazing. Make sure I get some of that icing. This is a good cake. You're gonna love it.